Clara had always been a strong woman, not because she chose to be, but because life never gave her another option. When Miguel, her husband, left without looking back, she was left alone with Samuel, a baby just a few months old, and a suitcase full of worries. The house was small, with a tin roof that clattered every time it rained. Even so, Clara never complained. Her world revolved around Samuel. She worked wherever she could, washing clothes for others, cleaning houses, and even planting a small vegetable garden in the backyard. There was no time for rest, but she always found a way to be with her son. When Samuel learned to walk, she would lay a cloth on the ground in the yard so he could play while she hung clothes on the line, softly singing hymns to lull him to sleep. Samuel grew quickly, and Clara couldn't hide her pride. He was smart, curious, and had a smile that filled her heart with joy, even on the hardest days. But the absence of a father was a constant weight. Clara did everything she could to make Samuel feel loved and secure. She often told him, "Son, what matters is that we have each other and God in our hearts." Life was tough, but it was filled with love. Clara made it her mission to teach her son the values she believed were most important: respect, gratitude, and faith. On Sundays, no matter how tired she was, she would take him to church. He loved running around the hall, even as Clara tried to maintain a sense of reverence. Still, as Clara worked tirelessly to build a future for Samuel, a small seed of fear lingered in her heart. She knew the world could be cruel, and things would only get harder as her boy grew older. Even so, every night before bed, she would hold Samuel close and say, "God has a beautiful plan for you, my son. Trust him." Time went on, and that energetic little boy began to change. Clara noticed it, but she chalked it up to his age. What she didn't know was that the boundless love she had poured into her son would soon be tested in ways she never imagined. And so begins the story of Clara and Samuel. But what happens when a mother's love is ignored? Before we continue today's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned, because this tale might be more moving than you expect. The years went by, and the boy who once ran joyfully around the yard had grown into a teenager full of opinions and, to Clara, nearly impossible to understand. At 15, Samuel always seemed restless. His easy smile had been replaced by a hardened expression, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "You don't get it, Mom," he would say whenever Clara tried to advise him. "Life isn't that simple." Clara was left speechless. How could she explain to her own son that she knew all too well what hardship was? That she had faced life with more questions than answers herself? Instead of arguing, Clara turned to prayer. At night, alone in her room, she would ask God for patience and wisdom to handle the son who, despite being so different now, was still her greatest love. Things got worse when Samuel started distancing himself from church. Clara insisted, "Son, at least come with me on Sunday." "I don't want to, Mom. I told you, that's not for me." Each rejection felt like a knife to Clara's heart, but she continued to hope and believe. Still, nothing seemed to work. Samuel began spending time with people Clara didn't know, and soon the problems started. He came home late, sometimes smelling of alcohol, and his grades at school plummeted. "What happened to you, Samuel?" Clara asked one night as he came in, slamming the door behind him. "Nothing happened, Mom. I just want to live my life." "But this isn't the life I dreamed for you." "That's the problem, Mom. All you care about is what you want." Those words hit Clara like a punch to the chest. She stood frozen in the living room, staring at the door Samuel had just slammed shut behind him. How had things gotten this far? Even so, she didn't give up. Clara began writing letters to Samuel, even though she knew he would never read them. In those letters, she poured out all the love she felt and tried to explain how hard she had worked to give him a better life. It was her way of coping with the pain of seeing her son drift further away every day. The breaking point came when Samuel turned 18. Tired of Clara's rules, he announced abruptly, "I'm leaving, Mom." "What do you mean, leaving? Where are you going?" "I'm moving to the city. I've already found a place to stay. I want my independence." Clara tried to reason with him, but Samuel was resolute. That night, he hastily packed a suitcase while Clara quietly cried in the kitchen. When he walked out the door, he barely looked back. Clara stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears, watching her son disappear down the road. Silence filled the house that night, and for the first time, Clara truly felt the weight of loneliness. The first few months away from home felt like a dream for Samuel. He felt free, no longer burdened by Clara's demands or anyone else's rules. He shared a cramped room with 2 other guys in the big city, but the lack of comfort didn't bother him. As he often told himself, freedom is worth more than anything. At first, Samuel managed to find a simple job in a warehouse, moving boxes. It wasn't what he had imagined, but the money covered his rent and nights out with friends. However, independent life soon revealed its harsher side. Bills kept piling up, his wages barely covered the basics, and the friends he had chosen were far from reliable. Nights at bars, gambling, and neglecting responsibilities became his routine. Samuel started missing work, and one day, the inevitable happened: he was fired. Without money and with his so-called friends drifting away, his sense of freedom began to crumble into despair. Even so, the thought of going home never crossed his mind. "I won't give my mom the satisfaction," he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself he could handle it all alone. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel barely had enough to eat. On nights when he couldn't scrape together any money, he wandered the streets, cold and hungry. Regretful thoughts began to haunt him. He remembered the simple but hearty meals Clara used to cook, the nights she sang him to sleep, and even the scoldings that now seemed filled with love. One night, sitting alone in a dark park, Samuel found a letter in the pocket of his coat. It was one of many that Clara had written and tucked into his suitcase before he left. With trembling hands, he unfolded it and read her words. "Samuel, my son, the world is big and full of challenges, but never forget where you came from. I'll always be here, praying for you and waiting for your return. Remember that God never gives up on us, and I won't give up on you either. With love, your mom." The tears came before he could stop them. Those words felt like an embrace he hadn't realized he needed. Yet even with the warmth of Clara's memory, Samuel still resisted the idea of going back. His stubbornness whispered louder, "No. I need to prove I can do this on my own." But as time went on, Samuel's pride began to waver. The struggles only grew, and the loneliness was a weight he could no longer bear. Will Samuel's hardened heart allow him to seek the road back home? Years passed, and Samuel drifted from place to place, always trying to stay afloat but never finding solid ground. He worked odd jobs wherever he could, hauling sacks at the market, washing cars, selling goods on street corners. It was a harsh and lonely existence. Samuel had lost touch with Clara. In the first few months after leaving home, she had tried calling him, but his number quickly changed. She sent letters, but they went unanswered. Still, she never gave up. Every night before bed, she prayed for him, asking God to protect him and bring him back. "He's my son, Lord, and I know you're watching over him, wherever he is." In the little house where Clara lived, time seemed to move more slowly. Without Samuel, the days were quiet, but she remained steadfast in her routine. She kept doing what she had always done, tending her garden, going to church, and writing letters to her son. It was her way of keeping hope alive, even when the ache of missing him felt overwhelming. Meanwhile, Samuel's life was a constant struggle. He tried to make things work, but nothing seemed to go right. At one point, he landed a job as a helper in a mechanic's shop, but he lost it after showing up late too many times. That night, sitting on the bed of a dingy rented room, Samuel felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He didn't want to admit it, but Clara's words never left his mind. God never gives up on us. He wondered if it was too late to change. Would his mother still forgive him after all this time? Was she even okay? But fear and pride kept him from seeking answers. The thought of facing Clara, along with his own guilt, held him back. One day, during a heavy rainstorm, Samuel, now 28, was walking through the city streets, soaked and exhausted. He passed a small church, and the sound of a hymn drifted out through the open windows. Something stirred in his heart, and he stopped. He stood there for a few minutes, listening to the melody. Suddenly, an overwhelming wave of longing hit him, so strong that he had to sit down. Memories of Clara, their simple home, and her unwavering faith flooded back to him. At that moment, he made a decision. "I need to go back." Samuel knew it wouldn't be easy, but something inside him told him it was time. He gathered what little he had and boarded a bus headed to the small town where he had grown up. But will he find Clara the way he remembers her? Or have the years of silence left scars that may be too deep to mend? The bus rumbled slowly along the winding roads of the small town. Samuel sat in the back row, staring out the window with a tightness in his chest. It had been 10 years since he left, and everything seemed the same yet somehow different. The journey home was a mix of anxiety and dread. When the bus stopped at the terminal, Samuel stepped off with a worn-out backpack slung over his shoulders. He looked around, recognizing faces and places he hadn't seen in years. Yet, the once welcoming town now felt like it was silently judging him. The walk to the house was long. Several times, Samuel hesitated, imagining Clara's reaction when she saw him. Was she still living there? Would she forgive him for leaving without ever looking back? He took a deep breath and kept going. When he reached the house, Samuel paused at the rusty gate. The garden Clara had tended so lovingly was now overrun with weeds. The paint on the house was peeling, but its silhouette was still familiar. With trembling hands, he opened the gate and approached the door. He knocked 3 times and waited. "Who is it?" A faint voice called from inside. Samuel recognized it instantly. It was Clara. But her voice sounded different, so tired, so frail. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Time had left its mark. Clara was thinner, her once black hair now almost entirely white. But her eyes, they still held that same loving sparkle. "Samuel?" she asked, as though she couldn't believe her own eyes. He couldn't speak. The words caught in his throat, and he fell to his knees at the doorway. "Forgive me, Mom, for everything." Clara knelt down with difficulty and wrapped her arms around him. There was no anger, no blame, only tears that washed away years of pain and longing. My son, you came back. That's all that matters." That night, they talked for hours, though Clara didn't have much strength to say a lot. Samuel noticed how fragile she was now. Her hands trembled, and she grew tired quickly. Still, she listened intently as he spoke about the mistakes he had made, the paths he had taken, and the shame that had kept him away for so long. As always, Clara didn't judge him. She simply placed her hand over his and said, "God always knew you'd come back, Samuel. I was just waiting for the day." But later that night, as Samuel helped her to bed, a harsh realization hit him: Clara was sick. Her body was weak, and he had returned too late to give back all that she had sacrificed for him. What can Samuel do now? Will Clara's boundless love be enough to give him a chance at redemption before time runs out? The days following Samuel's return were filled with intense moments. He devoted himself to caring for Clara, trying to make up for the years he had been absent. But time was unforgiving. Clara's health visibly worsened with each passing day. "Don't worry about me, my son," she would say in that calm tone Samuel remembered so well. "I'm at peace. You're here, and that's all that matters." But for Samuel, it wasn't enough. He needed to understand. He needed to know what she had endured during all those silent years. One morning, while Clara rested, he began organizing the house. He went into the small room she used as storage and started sorting through boxes and drawers. Amid old papers and childhood photos, he found a worn notebook filled with handwritten pages. It was Clara's diary. With trembling hands, Samuel began to read. Each page was a glimpse into his mother's heart. Her prayers, her struggles, and her sacrifices were all laid bare. He read about the nights she went without food so he could eat, the times she cried silently when he rebelled, and the emptiness she felt after he left. "Today I washed the last piece of Samuel's laundry before he left. My heart is broken, but I trust that God will watch over him wherever he is. I baked bread today. Even though I'm alone, I prepared it as if Samuel might walk through the door at any moment. The longing is overwhelming, but the love is greater." Samuel couldn't hold back his tears. He had always thought of Clara as strong, almost indestructible, but in those words, he saw her humanity, the pain she had borne in silence out of love for him. In another drawer, he found a bundle of letters. They were the letters Clara had written to him over the years, even knowing they would never be read. Each one was a testament to her unconditional love. On the final page of the diary, Clara's words were different. There, she wrote about her illness. "If it's God's will, I want to live to see Samuel return. I want to hug him and tell him I've always loved him, even in the hardest moments. But if that doesn't happen, I know God is with me. He has never left me alone." Samuel closed the diary and sat in silence, the weight of his mother's words pressing on his heart. For the first time, he truly grasped the depth of her love, even when he hadn't deserved it. That night, while Clara slept, Samuel knelt beside her bed and prayed as he hadn't in years. "God, forgive me for everything. Show me how to take care of my mom and be the son she always deserved." Clara, even with her eyes closed, murmured softly, "There's always time to start over, my son, always." Now that Samuel understands the enormity of Clara's sacrifices, he's determined to do something for her. But will time be on their side? After reading Clara's words, something shifted within Samuel. The weight of guilt still lingered, but it was now joined by a determination he had never felt before. He couldn't turn back time, but he could do everything in his power to be there for her now. Clara's days grew increasingly difficult. The illness weakened her, and Samuel did everything he could to care for her. He learned to cook the simple meals she liked, fetched her medicine, and spent hours reading passages from the Bible to her, just as she had done for him when he was a child. "You have a beautiful voice, my son," Clara said with a faint smile as he read from the Psalms. "It sounds like the calm of a gentle river." Despite his dedication, Samuel knew Clara didn't have much time left. The doctor who came to the house confirmed it, but Samuel refused to let despair take over. Instead, he focused on what he could do, create moments of joy, even in the midst of pain. One afternoon, Clara made a request. "I want to feel the sun on my face, Samuel," she said, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and hope. Samuel fashioned a makeshift wheelchair and brought her out to the yard. Though the garden was overgrown, Clara smiled at the flowers that still managed to bloom among the weeds. "The Lord brings life even in the most unlikely places, doesn't he?" she said, holding Samuel's hand. Samuel swallowed hard, trying to hold back his tears. "He does, Mom. He really does." That night, while Clara slept, Samuel made an even bigger decision. He mustered his courage and went to church for the first time in many years. As he walked in, he felt small and exposed, as if the weight of all those years of distance was pressing on his shoulders. The pastor greeted him, and Samuel, unable to hold back his emotions, said, "My mom always prayed for me to come back. I think it's time." That day, Samuel gave his life to God, feeling a relief he had thought impossible. He returned home determined to be the answer to Clara's prayers. In the days that followed, Samuel worked to transform their little house into a home again. He cleaned up the garden, painted the walls, and even repaired the old clothesline where Clara used to hang laundry. Every act was a symbol of his repentance and his effort to honor the love she had always shown him. But despite his efforts, Clara grew weaker with each passing day. One night, as Samuel held her hand, she spoke in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "You've given me peace, my son. Now I can rest." Is Clara ready to leave this world? And how will Samuel face the most profound goodbye of his life? The dawn arrived gently, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. Clara lay in bed, her face serene, her eyes closed. Samuel sat beside her, holding her hand. He had stayed up all night, listening to her faint breathing and whispering prayers, asking God for just one more day with her. Clara slowly opened her eyes and smiled when she saw him there. "You're still here," she said, her voice weary but sweet. "I'm not going anywhere, Mom," Samuel replied, squeezing her hand lovingly. She made a small effort to sit up, and Samuel quickly helped, adjusting the pillows behind her back. The room was bathed in sunlight streaming through the partly open curtains. Clara glanced around, as if she wanted to commit every detail to memory. "You know, Samuel," she began softly, "I always knew you'd come back. I had some hard days, but I never lost hope. A mother's love is like that, it waits, even when everything seems lost." Samuel couldn't hold back his tears. "I don't deserve this, Mom. I failed you, I left you. We all make mistakes, son. But what matters is what we do after. You came back, and that's all my heart ever needed." Clara asked Samuel to fetch her Bible from the bedside table. With trembling hands, she opened it to Romans 8 verse 28 and read quietly. "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." She looked at Samuel with tender eyes. "God has a purpose for you, my son. Promise me that when I'm gone, you'll seek it out." Overcome with emotion, Samuel grasped her hand tightly. "I promise, Mom. Everything I do will be to honor you and the God you always trusted." The rest of the day was quiet but filled with peace. Clara seemed to be in a place beyond pain, and Samuel stayed by her side the entire time. As night fell, Clara called for Samuel one last time. "Son, it's time." "I'm ready." Though Samuel's heart felt heavy with grief, he nodded with a lump in his throat. He held her hand and began to pray, just as she had always done for him. During the prayer, Clara closed her eyes, and with a final breath, she left for the arms of God. The silence that followed was unlike any Samuel had ever experienced. It wasn't empty but full of gratitude. He wept, yes, but his tears were mixed with relief, knowing that Clara was now at peace in a place free from suffering. That night, as he sat in the small yard under a sky full of stars, Samuel made a promise. "I'll live in a way that would make you proud, Mom. And I'll share the love you taught me with others." Clara may have left this world, but she left behind a legacy of love and faith that Samuel would carry forward. The days following Clara's farewell were the hardest of Samuel's life. The house, now so quiet, seemed to echo with his mother's laughter and prayers. Every corner held a memory, from the nights she comforted him after nightmares to the Sundays when she lovingly prepared their simple meals. But Samuel refused to let sorrow consume him. He remembered the promise he had made, and Clara's gentle voice still resonated in his mind. "Seek the purpose God has for you." One afternoon, while sorting through Clara's belongings, Samuel found a notebook with her handwriting on the cover, "My prayers for Samuel." He opened it to discover page after page of prayers she had written over the years. In every line, she interceded for him, asking God to guide his steps and transform him into a man of faith and courage. Those words ignited something in Samuel's heart. He realized Clara had never stopped believing in him, even during his darkest moments. Now it was his turn to honor that unwavering love. Samuel began attending the local church regularly. Before long, the pastor, noticing the change in him, invited Samuel to share his story with the youth in the community. At first, Samuel hesitated. He saw his life as an example of mistakes, not something worth sharing. "God uses the broken to reach the broken, Samuel," the pastor said. "Your testimony could change lives." Encouraged, Samuel agreed. In the modest church hall, he told everything: the rebellion, the abandonment, the pain of being lost, and finally, the journey home. But what moved the audience most was how he spoke about Clara's love, a love that had never given up on him. "My mother taught me that true love isn't perfect, but it's persistent. Her love brought me back, and God's love now gives me the strength to move forward." The impact was far greater than Samuel had imagined. After his testimony, several young people approached him to thank him and share their own struggles. In their eyes, Samuel saw a reflection of who he once was, lost, yet searching for something greater. Over time, Samuel began organizing weekly gatherings at the church for at-risk youth. He listened to their stories, offered advice, and spoke about God's love, much like Clara had done for him. Slowly but surely, he witnessed lives being transformed, and he felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. One evening, after one of these gatherings, Samuel stayed alone in the church hall, gazing at the altar. He whispered a prayer, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. "Thank you, God, for never giving up on me." Clara's love lives on, guiding Samuel as he embarks on a journey filled with meaning. But will he remain steadfast when an unexpected challenge crosses his path? The small town seemed to have been reborn alongside Samuel. The weekly gatherings at the church now drew not only young people but also families seeking hope. Samuel, once a lost man, had become a cornerstone for many. He knew all of this was rooted in Clara's love, a love that had transformed his life and was now reaching so many others. One day, as Samuel prepared for another gathering, he was visited by a young woman named Marina. She was 19 and visibly nervous. "They said you help people like me," she began, her voice trembling. Marina shared that she had run away from home after constant fights with her parents. She was alone, directionless, and unsure how to start over. Her story struck a chord with Samuel, stirring memories of his own struggles, and he listened intently to every word. "You're not alone, Marina," he told her gently. "I know what it feels like to be lost, but you can find a new path. If I could, so can you." With Samuel's guidance, Marina reconciled with her family and became a regular attendee at the gatherings. She was the first of many Samuel would help directly, further solidifying his belief that he was fulfilling the purpose Clara always believed he had. Despite his progress, Samuel faced challenges. There were times when he felt the weight of responsibility, moments when fatigue and doubt crept in. But whenever that happened, he would remember Clara's words. "There's always time to start over." A year after Clara's passing, Samuel organized a special event to honor her memory. In the church hall, he placed a photo of his mother in a place of honor, surrounded by simple flowers, just the kind she had loved. Members of the community, young people Samuel had helped, and even old friends of Clara came to share memories and stories of how her life had touched theirs. At the end of the evening, Samuel stood to speak. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "My mother wasn't wealthy or influential. But what she had was a heart full of love and an unshakable faith. That's what changed my life and brought me here. Everything I do now is to honor her legacy and to show others that it's never too late to start again." Samuel's words resonated deeply with everyone in the room. Many wept, not only for the loss of Clara but also because they were moved by the impact of her life and the example she had left behind. That night, as Samuel walked home under the starry sky, he felt Clara's presence, like a whisper carried on the wind. He knew she would be proud, not only of the man he had become but also of the love he was passing on to others. Clara's legacy wasn't just one of unconditional love. It was a seed planted in Samuel's heart, now blooming and touching lives, proving that there is always a way back. And you? Have you reflected on the impact a mother's love and the love of Jesus can have on your life? Share in the comments how this story has touched your heart. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This is Narrativas K. Abraham. Stay with God, and we'll see you in the next story.